Hello everyone, welcome to or welcome back to my channel. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lena and I make college and book related content here on YouTube. And today I will be sharing with you all my September wrap up. I tried to film this video last week. I know I haven't posted in 2 weeks, maybe more at this point. I really did try to get it up last week, and literally when I was filming this video, my residents knocked on the door and then my afternoon got thrown off and it was a whole thing. So when I was filming, you can hear them knock on the door and see the look of fear pass across my face. But yeah, I'm finally getting to filming it this week, and hopefully it will be able to also go up this week of our mid-semester break. So I need to kind of balance my schoolwork and getting this video up. That being said, I'm excited to get into this video and share with you all the books that I read in the month of September. So the first book that I read in the month of September was Middlemarch and the Imperfect Life by Pamela Aarons. This is a memoir of Pamela Aarons and her life, and it's kind of how her experience with reading Middlemarch, the novel, at different points in her life and kind of how it shaped her perception, and then also reflections on the different parts of her life and how that also was reflected in the novel and how her perception of the novel changed. I read this book because Pamela Aarons was actually coming to my university to give a little lecture, and I was invited to go to dinner with her as well as attend the lecture because of my senior project on Middlemarch, and I actually also was able to get Pamela Aarons to sign this book, which is so exciting and great. So I read this book, and I'm not a big memoir person, but I did think it was really interesting just because I have so many thoughts and feelings about Middlemarch and how it shaped my life. I'm also significantly younger and at a different point in my life, but I do think it's interesting to think about how novels shape people's lives. And so I was really excited that I had the chance to read this and then also meet her and talk a little bit about her own experience. The second book that I read in the month of September was A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. This book follows 4 different points of view. It starts off the story with Jack, who is the bard of the island of Cadence, and he is actually on the mainland getting educated and completing his studies in being a bard and kind of instructing in music and things like that. But he is summoned home because on the island there are issues with young girls being kidnapped and they're not returning and there's no trace of them, and people are starting to be really concerned. And he's told that as a bard he will have the answer for this. So when he returns back, he finds that all of this is true, and he has to band together with his childhood enemy to kind of solve the mystery of what's happening with these young girls. I got this book as my book of the month in August. It was technically a book of the month for February, but I ended up not getting it until August, and I am so glad I read this book. This book, genuinely, when I was reading it, felt like it was written for me. It was a breath of fresh air after all of the books that I've been reading up until this point. It just felt so perfect for me. It felt comforting. It was just like a joyful reading experience. Genuinely, I obviously gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I was obsessed with the different points of view. There's 4 in total, like I said, and I found all of them so strong. Specifically, Sidra and Torin, who are older characters on the island, and they're basically the parents' age of Jack and Adira, and their love story / relationship just melted my heart. It was so just powerful and just so real and raw and human, and I appreciated that so much. I also thought the world building was incredibly strong, and it had some great different magical elements and unique aspects that I haven't seen in a lot of other novels. It also played on a lot of borderline tropes, but not in a bad way. It played on a lot of things that I love in fantasy novels and a lot of aspects of characterization and character relationships that I really adore. I was just so happy every time I opened this book up. I couldn't put it down. I was just engrossed in it every time I opened it, and I honestly could not recommend this book more, and I'm excited to finish the duology when this second book comes out in December. The third book that I read in the month of September was Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. I am in a English seminar for Jane Austen. That's our subject or focus. And so we're reading most of her novels, not quite all of them, but most of them. So this is the second novel that we read, and it basically follows Eleanor and Marianne, who are two sisters, and they kind of represent the two different sides of Sense and Sensibility, which was supposedly a really big historical argument that was going on during this time. It's obviously a classic. It's Jane Austen. It's probably not one of her more loved books, but it is definitely read quite a bit, and I mean there's been a million adaptations on this as well. I gave this book 3.5 out of 5 stars. I left it at 3 stars, I think, just because overall I was not obsessed with this when I was reading it, but I do think that the historical context of the argument between Sense and Sensibility is really interesting, and the way that Jane Austen puts these two different characters through Eleanor and Marianne and kind of sets up this argument as to the merits of both sides and also the issues and detrimental impacts of both sides. I think that there were moments of really great sisterly quips and interactions that I really adored. There were also moments of just extreme character underdevelopment and plot underdevelopment that was really frustrating for me. And it started to make me question like how I would feel about rereading of Pride and Prejudice. But overall, I thought it was a sweet story. The fourth book that I read in the month of September was A Perilous Question by Antonia Fraser, and I read this in preparation for my Middlemarch project. I decided to check it out of the library because I thought it would offer great historical context on the Reform Bill of 1832 in Great Britain, but also kind of the historical context leading up to that reform bill. That is when Middlemarch is taking place. So I read this book and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I thought it was pretty well researched. I thought it gave a great basis for understanding who the key figures were, how Parliament works, the different parties, the different issues kind of interacting with the monarchy. I also found that very interesting because the monarchy was obviously different than the monarchy is today, and also as someone who doesn't know a ton about English government, it was interesting to learn about specifically at this time. I also think it was really helpful because I'm doing some research on reform and kind of radical reform and things like that, and so it was really helpful to understand the different groups who were trying to get reform accomplished and also the different ways that they were going about it. I do think that at times it was a little narrow in its view and also just skimmed over some to what seemed to me important topics, and I think this was partly because the author was trying to not have this like enormous this enormous piece of text that we had to read. She kept it like around, I think, slightly over 200 pages, but I do think that it left me wanting to know more, which is a good and bad thing. So I just left it at 3 out of 5 stars because I thought it did a good job setting a basis, but I don't know that it necessarily opened up my perspective to new perspectives. The fifth book that I read in the month of September was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, of course, for my Austen seminar. I have already read Pride and Prejudice previously. I read it in 7th grade. It was one of like the first adult classics that I ever read, or at least one of the first ones when I was intentionally decided that I wanted to read classics. And so it was interesting to reread it now, like, you know, borderline almost a decade later. Not quite, but almost, which is wild to think about. But anyway, I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I left it the same rating that I gave it originally when I was in 7th grade because honestly, my 21-year-old self does agree with a lot of the things that I think I was 12-year-old Lena was saying. I really enjoyed a lot of the sister relationships, the interactions. I thought that a lot of the romance was really great, and I remember loving it for the same exact reasons. I thought that the younger sisters were underdeveloped, which also I again thought that in reading this. I was more frustrated in reading it the second time because I really feel like the younger sisters also just got the short end of the stick in characterization and were made really flat and also unlikable for really no reason. I had like moments of not loving it as much, and I think that honestly is because reading this many Austens in a row is becoming tedious. We're reading right now Emma, we're almost all the way done with it, and just I am kind of like reading too much Austen, and I didn't really think about that, but it's like kind of burning me out a little bit. And so I think that if I was able to read these books for the first time more spread out, that would change it, because when I came back to this book, I remembered a lot of the things that I loved about it the first time. And then for my Shakespeare class, I'm taking a Shakespeare and performance class to round out my English major. We read 4 of Shakespeare's history plays known as the second tetralogy, I think, but it's the first chronologically in history, but it's the second in when he wrote it. And so that would be Richard II, the first and second parts of Henry IV, and then Henry V. We watched them and read them in class and outside of class. And honestly, I haven't read a lot of, and by I hadn't read a lot of, I mean, I've never read any of Shakespeare's history plays until this class, so I think that was really interesting. If I were to pick a favorite, it would probably be either Richard II or Henry V. I just did not love either part 1 or part 2 of Henry IV. And I did not, because I didn't find Henry V as a character in those plays extremely likable until he showed up in Henry V. I also think it's really interesting to think about how Henry V has been portrayed in Shakespeare's plays and kind of what he actually did in real life, but kind of how Shakespeare's version is the version that lives on in so many people's minds. And so I think that's interesting to consider, and the bias and like borderline propaganda that encourages. But I read all those 4 for the class. I have not actually rated them on Goodreads because I'm like, do I put them on Goodreads? Like, I don't know. I'm back and forth on it. I have put other Shakespeare plays that I've read in them, but it just feels like less, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I should like group them and like label them as a tetralogy or do them individually. We're moving on to the other tetralogy with parts 1, 2, and 3 of Henry VI, and then we'll eventually get to Richard III, I think, next week. So those are all the books that I read in the month of September. Honestly, I wish I could have read more books for pleasure, more books that I just like want to read just for the fun of it. But I am really grateful that I was able to at least read A River Enchanted, because truly that book brightened up my September and made me so happy, and I definitely recommend. If you have any questions or book recommendations, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next week.